How do you think the exponential growth of telephony services has changed daily lives in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much, for giving me the opportunity to talk on this issue. As you've clearly stated, it's been 22 years. It's been a journey of 1,000 miles. Um, if you look at before and after, if you recall, we used to work together we all started this day together, and we know how difficult it was transmitting even our scripts, story scripts from outside Lagos. We had to resort to the most manual of methods, and then we used to have to look for faxes to send handwritten scripts to the Lagos office, and that was always a challenge. Then we had about, I recall then we had probably something in the region of 400,000. Nitel, which was a monopoly, was the only telecommunications operator, had about 400,000 lines. MTEL, its mobile subsidiary, had about 10,000 mobile lines. I remember they were called the Not 9 Not numbers. Nitel then also had a couple of phone centers. I don't know what they're called any longer, but places where you could go and make phone calls, especially if you want to make calls abroad. And we used to line up, go to Nitel centers, um, mainly in the metropolitan areas such as Lagos, perhaps Abuja and Port Harcourt, would line up there and make international calls. And for those of us who had phones in our homes, I remember the challenge we used to have to make sure they're functional. I recall I was a freelance journalist for some foreign media publications, and I had to have internet connectivity. So it was imperative for me to make sure my phone line, those are the days of dial up, internet dial ups, and I was always struggling to ensure that my phone line was working. Anytime it had a problem, I would have to go to Nitel's office to beg and cajole and spend so much time to make sure that they fixed my line. So it was a major challenge for a lot of us. So most people didn't have access, and then telephony was considered something that was only. I remember a minister of communications, federal is it commissioner or minister of communication then at the time said that phones were only for the rich, but that shouldn't have been the case. But by the time mobile technology came, it started with first the CDMAs. The CDMAs, however, had their challenges in the sense that they didn't have the necessary capital to roll out on a national level. So they were limited to perhaps nothing more than maybe 50,000, 50 to 80,000 lines, and which were still concentrated in major metropolitan areas such as Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and perhaps Kaduna or Kano. So the licensing of the first set of operators in 2001, I think that was Econet at the time, MTN, and MTEL did not participate in that auction, but it was automatically given a license. MTEL, the Nitel subsidiary. And then, of course, the competition, when they were given a couple of months, 7 months to roll out, and they rolled out, and then the exponential growth in telecommunications or communication services, both in terms of voice and data, has been tremendous. Today we have well over 200,000 lines in this country. We also have access to data. That has tremendously transformed our lives. Right now, we can communicate, we can work remotely. One of the major significant advantages is that a lot of people now have learned to work remotely. Even organizations have realized that it's not necessary um, um, for staff to come into the office, and this even started long before COVID. Um, I use myself as an example. When I became the editor of the paper of this day, I spent out of the 6 years my 6-year tenure, I spent 5 of those years editing the paper from home. And that was made possible because of improved telecommunications and data, that is voice and data services in the country. So it's played a role in so many, throughout our lives, both in the financial sector, in agriculture, in healthcare, in education. You can see what happened during the COVID outbreak. A lot of schools had to resort to online teaching, and that was made possible because of the telecommunication services we have today. Prior to 2001, probably the whole country would have been completely shut down. But at least with telecommunications, with the rollout of voice and mobile telephony and data access, there's been a huge improvement in communication, in access, in finance. The entire ecosystem has been touched by it.
With the recent launch of 5G services globally, including Nigeria, what trends do you foresee in the telecom service in Nigeria, and how might these trends impact other industries?
Well, as you know, the 5G, or rather fifth generation technology is successor to 4G. And what it essentially means is that it's essentially um, improved broadband, and there will be better reach to so many areas. And with 5G, we hope that there will be a drop. I mean, there will be a reduction in the cost of data. Right now, one of the challenges we have in this country is that even though we have 4G and now it's being succeeded by 5G, but it's still broadband access is still considered very expensive. But it's hoped that with the rollout of 5G, this will reduce the cost of um, broadband data, which is much more, which has higher latency and higher speed, download speeds, and what have you. And with higher bandwidth, it will be able to deliver faster speeds. And it should have an overall improvement in terms of economic development, access to improved communications, um, and even in the areas of things like the Internet of Things and machine to machine areas, and even with AI technology, broadband will be able to facilitate um, this new technological innovations that is emerging all over
I
the world.
said, as someone with deep private and public sector experience,
Yes.
what suggestion would you offer policymakers and regulators to further unlock investment opportunities that will drive the growth of the Nigerian telecom sector?
My problem, you see, it's this. This might not be limited to just to telecommunications, but so one of my challenges with regulation in this country is that it's been too rigid. It's not been as flexible as it should be. Um, when there's excessive regulation in any economy, and there's been so many studies on it, when there's any form of excessive regulation comes at a cost. And when there's excessive regulations and rules that you make market participants to abide by, these costs are naturally um, transferred to consumers. So our regulators, one of the things I always tell our regulators is that they need to learn to adopt measures lay down guidelines that does not make the services which the market participants are trying to provide to consumers or subscribers, make them costlier. So in other words, they should ensure that there is a competitive, that the environment remains competitive, and they should also ensure that fiscal regime for market participants remains attractive, so that they continue to invest in technology and other, and roll out their networks in such a way that there is no that they continue to broaden their services and what have you. So that's I'm very particular about regulators understanding they need to keep improving learning. They need to be more flexible. They need to be adaptive to any situation, and what have you.
You're someone who would have the advantage position having worked at the Bureau of Public Enterprises and witnessed the privatization of public enterprises, including NITEL, the pioneer national operator for Nigeria, and its mobile business unit, NITEL. What do you think was responsible for the inability of these telecom companies, which were the giant of that era, to compete in today's telecoms industry? They say they virtually had fizzled out of the market.
Simple: government interference, government ownership. Government has no business being in business. That's all. The minute you brought in the competition, NITEL could no longer compete. Simple. It didn't have the wherewithal, it didn't have the human capital, it didn't have the financial muscle. The government didn't have the capacity to fund it, to roll out its network, or rather for MTEL to roll out the network and compete, even though government provided the $285 million to pay for the license, for the 3G license in 2001. But it did not provide capital for MTEL to roll out. And as long as there was government interference in the way they appointed the executives and management and what have you, it was going to fail. It was just a matter of time. So the truth of the matter is that government it was a clear example of government has no business being in business. And unfortunately, BP's attempts to privatize NITEL failed for a number of reasons that were beyond the control of the privatization agency. As you know, the first attempt to privatize NITEL, I think, happened in 2001 too. And it also happened in 2000, I believe it was October 2001. And a preferred bidder emerged, and as part of the privatization process of NITEL, the preferred bidder was supposed to have put down a certain percentage of the bid price, which he provided the core investor that emerged, the preferred bidder. He put 10% of the bid price, but he was also expected to pay the balance within a specified deadline, failing which he was going to lose that 10%. And when the preferred bidder was unable to meet the deadline, it lost the 10%. And of course, that caused quite a bit of crisis in the banking system. As you know, it was First Bank provided the 10% to the preferred bidder. I believe that was IRLL, which led to and the board of First Bank was so upset about the fact that they had lost quite a bit of money in the process, that quite a bit of money had been forfeited by the government, and led to the sack of their MD. And so that transaction went belly up. The next attempt to try and bring in, to privatize NITEL was through a management contract, when the BP felt that, okay, since the attempt to sell it through an outright core investor sale failed, BP now decided to change the strategy for privatizing NITEL by bringing in, I think it was a Dutch firm, to bring it in under a management contract. But that again failed because the Dutch firm was not willing to provide or bring in any funding. Was not willing to bring in any funding, and so that again. And then there was also the political. There was a lot of political backlash. There was a lot of not just from the politicians but also from labor who fought against the management contract, and then they put so much pressure on the National Assembly, and the whole thing had to be cancelled. The contract had to be terminated, and I can't remember the name of the company now, but the company had to. Sorry?
Bright Media?
Bright Media. I can't remember.
Okay, no, it wasn't Bright Media. It was another company after Bright.
It was a Dutch. I'll remember now. It was a Dutch. I remember it was a Dutch company.
Fantastic.
I'm sure if we'll Google it, we'll find the name. Anyway, the contract was terminated midstream, in our usual habit of, terminating contracts, and the company had to leave Nigeria. And then by the time all this was happening, as time was passing, meanwhile, MTN, Econet, Glo had already been licensed, were rolling out and providing voice services, providing telephony services. And NITA was no longer able to compete. Its fixed line services were no longer needed. Everybody had transited to mobile telephony services. And MTEL had lost the few customers. I remember when MTEL started at the beginning, to manage to have 1 million subscribers. But those subscribers left the network. They all transited from the network because it was unable to expand, roll out its network. And so you go with its phone to many parts of the country and there's no service. So people started dropping their lines. And NITA became a shadow of its former self. So at the end of the day, BP was left with no option than to liquidate the institution, which it did a couple of years later. And, the only asset NITA really held by that time was the subsea cable through which it can provide broadband data services. But even then, I don't even know if it is competitive in that area. Because its successor company, Entel, which acquired the subsea cable, I don't know if they are effectively competing against the likes of Main One and Globalcom. I think those are the bigger broadband in terms of through the subsea cables. They are the bigger broadband providers.
In his May 29, 2023 inauguration speech, President Bola Tinubu said he was committing to prioritizing the digital economy for creating 1 million jobs. If you were to give some strategic recommendations, what would be the recommendations that you offer Mr. President to enable him and his administration achieve this digital economy?
Well, if he wants to, the road path to a digital economy cannot happen without first fixing electricity. So, so all our operators today are dependent on alternative energy sources. So, which makes their digital services uncompetitive relative to other countries. So one of the first things I would advise any administration interested in expanding its digital economic footprint is to first ensure that we have stable electricity supply. Secondly, we should continue to formulate legal and regulatory frameworks that attracts investments. Fortunately, into the digital economy. Fortunately, we have a lot of young Nigerians who have shown a penchant who are well educated and trained both locally and abroad, who have started many startups in healthcare, digital IT startups in finance, healthcare, agriculture, and what have you. And they are and even in e-commerce, and their services are gaining traction all over the world. And through that, they've been able to do a lot of capital raising from the most mature markets in the world. But however, we need to have also some kind of framework that ensures that these people who are starting these startups, a lot of these startups, whereas a few of them are succeeding, quite a few are also failing. So we need to come up with some kind of framework that ensures that these people who are raising money or who are beginning to attract interests in those fields do not fail. So we need to find out what is it that makes them fail. Is it the attitude of the owners, that, or is it they don't have they don't have the support of the regulators and what have you? So a digital economy is not just about providing the legal and regulatory framework. It's also about training and ensuring that people who are interested in entering this space have the capacity and build up sustainable institutions that do not fail after 1 or 2, 3 years.
I mean, highly celebrated African journalism field. Across Nigeria, Africa, and beyond, you've equally held top leadership position in media institutions, both locally and internationally. Can you, for the benefit of our viewers, give us a bit of insight into your journey and how this passion started, and where it is today and where it's also leading into the future?
Are you referring to my journey in journalism?
Well, your journey transcends journalism. You were also in the public sector and all of that. So just give us some insight into that will equally inspire the next generation of folks coming in to be able to borrow from your experience.
Okay, I actually didn't study anything related to journalism in school, in uni. I studied accounting, and by virtue of my degree from the University of Lagos, I actually went into banking and spent 5 years in banking. So my foray into journalism was actually a fluke at the beginning. It was supposed to be temporary. So I was in between jobs. I had worked in the bank for 5 years, Merchant Bank of Africa. And while I was looking for something else to do, somebody suggested, okay, this day is being set up. Why don't you go and work for them on their business desk? I felt it was a temporary thing. And I said, fine, let me just go and try my hand out at business journalism. And I started with them and fell madly in love with it. And I felt this was, it gave me the freedom and the liberty that I never experienced while I was a banker. Banking was too routine, it was terribly boring for me. I mean, I'm the kind of person that needs my creative liberty. And so journalism gave me that opportunity to express myself. Fortunately, we also have a publisher who gives you that liberty. He's not the kind of person that will stifle you. And that's how I developed from capital markets to money markets to covering energy. And then after I was at some point redeployed to Abuja to head the entire business desk in Abuja, and then came back to Lagos, and shortly afterwards was called upon. I was one of those headhunted by Nasir Rufai to join them at the BP, to join them with the privatization, to assist with the privatization process. And Nasir recognized that getting people from the private sector to work with the BP would be a tall order if he did not get the right compensation. So he managed to get first the United States USAID, and then subsequently the World Bank to pay our salaries. And we're there, so we're called the core team and were involved with the privatization process. A lot of the reforms that we see today, from telecommunications to oil and gas, pensions, power sector, and everything, were initiated by Nasir with his personnel in the BPE, which was an excellent experience. I remain thankful for that experience. And when my contract was over, I came back to this day, because I never actually resigned. I took a leave of absence. Came back to this day. By that time, I was made the editor of first the nation's capital, and 6 months later brought back to Lagos to be made the editor of the Saturday paper, which was quite an enjoyable experience. And a couple of years later, Sunday editor, and then the editor of the paper. And when my tenure expired as editor of the paper, I moved on to I was redeployed to become the first managing director of Arise, it was a transition from print journalism to broadcast journalism, and it was a worthwhile experience. In between, I've sat on quite a few boards from my days in BPE. So because you have the power of attorney of a lot of the public enterprises you're handling, you have to sit on those boards. So I started sitting on boards at quite an early age, from my 30s, and I still sit on a number of boards still today. Now in the private sector.
Drawing from your experience, what advice would you give to Nigeria's new generation of journalism leaders, gatekeepers, and professionals who are poised to drive the media industry's digital future?
I'd say first and foremost, they need to read. The problem I see in a lot of people is that there's this reluctance to keep improving and reading and training. So yes, I do know that a lot of journalists in Nigeria don't have access to training, but then again, you can improve yourself by reading, doing a lot of research with access to the internet now, and even ChatGPT apps now. You have the information at your fingertips, and there's nothing, even on YouTube, you can educate yourself on so many things. You don't need to go on training programs, as far as I'm concerned. So if you want to become the best at what you do, first and foremost, make out that time, read, keep improving yourself, be very good at what you do, be knowledgeable, so that even when there's information asymmetry, which is asymmetry, which is very, very common in the media space in Nigeria, you can, you'll be able to separate the wheat from the chaff, because that's a common problem. I see a lot of articles, and in the papers, both online and the print, and I see that even though the papers are writing these stories, there's a level of unawareness, I don't want to use the word ignorance, in the way the stories are presented. And you do have people complaining that Nigerian journalists do not tend to present their stories in such a way that makes sense, especially if you're writing in areas such as technology, finance, and what have you, economy and what have you. There are a lot of complaints that sometimes our journalists don't seem to understand what they're writing about. So the only way they can improve themselves is, first and foremost, if you're assigned to a beat, be the best at be the best on that beat. Learn everything you have to learn. It's not just about looking for money, but also put in the hard work. It's only when you put in the hard work that you begin to see the rewards. You have to be the best at it. You have to be conscientious. You have to be willing to put in the hours, long hours. You have to be investigative. You have to be inquisitive. You have to be able to, if you're a financial journalist, you have to be able to write stories that moves the markets. You have to be able to give opinions. If you're an analyst, you have to be able to analyze in such a way that it gets noticed by the policymakers and decision makers. If your articles or if your shows on television and radio are not being noticed, are not making a mark, then as far as I'm concerned, you're failing as a journalist. So that's all our advice.